Todd Rexine. I'm a conservation director for a nonprofit in the Twin Cities. And our main focus on biochar is getting on the natural lands and how to implement change on the landscape. Just to give a background on Gray River Greening, we're a 501c3 nonprofit in Minnesota, conservation nonprofit. Our background is in natural resource management. We're going on the landscape, we're removing invasive species, trees, shrubs, and to give you an idea of our scale, we have about 120 ongoing restoration projects at any one time, all at different stages, but every one of those, we're dealing with wood waste. Minnesota itself is divided into 3 different biomes. We've got the prairie on the west, we got the big woods that goes up through the middle of the state, and then the northern part, we got our northern woods. And we're dealing with wood waste at different levels across that. We're dealing with, in the prairies, we're dealing with encroachment of wood materials, whether it's cedars or Siberian elm or other stuff like that. Forests, we're dealing with buckthorn and invasive species that have been brought over for good purposes, but have now escaped into our natural areas. And ultimately, the first step in doing conservation is for us to go in and start doing restoration and getting that wood waste off the site. And then what do we do with it? That's where we came up with our Biochar Initiative, where our staff was sitting around, and this is almost 5 years ago now, and we're like, there's a lot of wood waste and things are changing. What do we do with it? And so how do we expand the process of biochar? And we did the web search. We all had to educate ourselves. We're reading up on what's going on the West Coast, who's doing what on the East Coast. And that's when we came across biochar as a possibility for what we do with this wood waste. So the issue is, in Minnesota for a while, we were able to take all that wood waste and process it into biofuels. We have 3 biofuel plants in the state of Minnesota. So if I had 200 acres of cedar that I have a contractor out there clearing, they're gonna chip it, it gets shipped off, the trucks come in, they're deadheaded, so the trucks need something to do on their way back. They would stop by the site, they get filled up with wood chip, and they'd haul it off to biofuel plants. And they'd go back, burn for energy to put back on the grid. 2017, our biofuel plants started closing down. We have 1 left in the state. It's in St. Paul, and they're at capacity. And most of our work is in greater Minnesota. As you saw the map, or previous map, we're working in all those green zones, and we're trying to expand into those blue zones. Minneapolis and St. Paul are that red square down there. So top picture up there, that's a pile of buckthorn. For those of you that don't know what buckthorn is, it's an invasive species brought over from Europe and Asia. It's an understory shrub, but it totally takes over the forest. And we were focusing on, at that time, that's probably 3 different sites in the Twin Cities that we had contractors hauling the buckthorn to 1 location so it could get shipped and get to a biofuels plant. 2017, again, I said the plants start closing. That's really because of what was going on with the economy and energy. Solar and wind were coming up and they're better subsidized, so the plants started closing. There's more economic support for those processes. And that's when we started seeing all of our conservation service providers started going back to increasing burn piles, so now we had started having burn piles back in the landscape. Or more and more, we're just mowing everything down. And both of those, you know, they do what they need to do. They're getting us back to someplace we need to do on the conservation side and start restoring the land. But we're also releasing all that carbon in different ways. And whether we burn it, it goes up right away, or as it decomposes on the landscape over 3 to 4 to 5 years, it's also decomposing, going up into the air. The one big problem, as everybody knows, with burn scars, for those of you that do burning pile or have been around burn piles, 2 years later, you're still left with a scar because you just killed all the soil. And in the conservation world, we haven't figured out what to do with those scars in the soil. We've killed all the microbes in the soil, and all we start getting in is our weedy species like thistle and stuff like that, and we cannot restore that land. And then on top of that, so we're dealing with all this, and then we got all these bugs that come in. And so I know we're all dealing with different bugs across the landscape. We got emerald ash borer. We've been talking about emerald ash borer since I took my job at Gray River Greening 18 years ago. Because we saw it coming. Did we do anything about it? Nope, now we're dealing with it. So now we're cutting down all of our ash trees in Minnesota. But then we also have spruce budworm up in the northern part of the state that's killing all of our spruce trees and balsam firs. We got oak wilt going across the landscape as well. And our whole entire system in the state of Minnesota is now being consumed by all this wood waste. And so just to give you an idea of what buckthorn looks like on the landscape, I apologize, it's a little grainy, but on the left is what buckthorn looks like in a wooded landscape. And everybody, oh, it's green, it looks great. That's like this great, beautiful forest. It's not. There's nothing else going on in there. It's choking out. It's the first thing to green up in the spring of the year and the last thing to drop its leaves in the fall of the year. And so then we've gone in on the far right, and that's a site where we've done remediation. That's 5 years later, and now we've started being able to plant in the site. And just to give you an idea of what capacity we're talking about, this is another buckthorn. This is a fen site. And I was intrigued when I thought about this. I did this site in 2012. I wasn't thinking about biochar at this time. I was thinking about what am I going to do with all that buckthorn that's completely infesting this fen. But I knew how many piles were out there, and I knew the size of them because I hired a contractor to burn all these. But we had 5 piles across 20 acres. That's 75 cubic yards of brush sitting out there that we just burned. Give you an idea, I did the math. 19 adult elephants is about the weight of all that wood waste that just was burned at that time. So I've set up the issues. These are the issues that we're dealing with in Minnesota. And like I said, we had a kind of a come to grips in our staff is at that time there was only about 5 of us on our conservation staff, and we're like, we need to do something different. So back in 21, we said we're going to go and ask the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, which is a state funding agency, for a request to talk about how we get biochar on site and start to do it in the woods, and what does that approach look like? And we asked other foundations, and why do I say that? We didn't get funded in 21. We had to go back in 22 and start reaching out to our legislative members that sit on that council for those funds and educate them because they did not know what biochar was. And we had to talk to them at what can biochar do for their gardens. You know, we had to come in at the very bare bones and start talking to them at that level. And then we were successful. In 2022, we were able to get funding to kick off our biochar initiative. And our approach is, we took the approach of, we need our contractors to do this, but we can't do it unless we know how to do it, and then we need to figure out how to train them. So we took a whole entire year, so most of 2023, we spent with our staff and our crews on site. We bought kilns. That was part of the process. Part of the funding was to help us get Oregon kilns and Ring of Fire kilns in the state of Minnesota. And we went out and we took the time to train our staff up on how to use kilns so we knew how to process properly. And we could share that with everybody else. At the same time, we realized that what works on the West Coast, what works on the East Coast, doesn't work in Minnesota. We have different growing conditions. We're feeding different feedstock in, and the drying time is not 30 days. It's almost 90 days. Things are taking longer to dry here. We have a dry day in Minnesota is 40% humidity, RH. That's not the same in other parts. You know, everybody has a different RH and how long stuff takes to dry out. So once we got our crews up to speed, we also had our crews out cutting sites. So we had them go out to an acre, and I need to know if I'm going to talk to a service provider on I need you to do biochar processing from cutting the material to processing the material. What is the density that you need to kind of base your numbers on? So we had our crews go out, they would do stem density counts. When they would cut an acre, they'd pile it, we'd figure out how many cubic yards is there, and then we would process that and report out. So we're trying to track everything throughout the whole cycle so that when I get done at the end of our project here at the end of next year, I now have numbers that can say, approximately if you have this stem density, this is what you can expect for cubic yards of material on that site, and how much time it should, man time or people time it should take to process that. And then on top of it, we're also working with permitting. No one knew what biochar was when we started talking to our forest councils and everybody else. I guess I should take that. They had heard of biochar. They didn't know what the process was. And what do you mean you're going to take these big giant fire pits out into the landscape and have bonfires across the landscape outside of 4-inch snow conditions? That's typically when you burn piles in Minnesota is 4 inches of snow on the ground. You don't need a permit. That's when we light everything up. We're pushing that we can do it year round unless there's a red flag. We don't have burn bans like the rest of the country has. If it's a good day to burn, it's a good day to burn, as long as conditions are right. And then it's also educating the local. So we're talking the DNR for our statewide permitting, but then we're also talking to the local. And if you look at each Minneapolis alone, or the county we're in now, we've got about 50 different local government units that we need to talk to each time we get a permit. And so the other part is we got permitting all the way. What's the approach? We're working with service providers that are used to doing natural resource restoration. Most of our natural resource restoration people are come from a prescribed burn background. So what technology do they have already in the back of their garage or that they use on a daily basis, and what else do they need to do this differently? Looking at different things. We even looked at the welding industry. I saw on another slide people have welding gloves. My personal preference is to wear a welding bib when I'm around one of these kilns. I do not like Nomex. Nomex is fine. It doesn't burn, but it doesn't protect you from the heat from these kilns. So just simple things like that we were tweaking and talking with them about what kind of gear do you need that you already have or that you need to ramp up. Most of our prescribed fire guys have 300-gallon tankers in the back of their trucks. What do they need to do with those 300-gallon tankers? There's a difference. They spray a lot more pressure when they're working a fire line than what they need for doing these kilns. So how do they pressure down their kilns or their pumps? And then the next one is now we did this. We went out, figuring out permitting. We're figuring out what we need to do as far as how we need to adapt it to Minnesota, what the gear is. Now it's time to get out and let's get education and get demonstrations going. And that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years. We're holding demonstrations. We're talking to fire professionals. I'm talking to service providers. I'm getting our conservation districts out, talking to local government units. We're also talking to any of those landowners that have a forest track on it that they may have to manage. They have a 10-acre large lot. How do they manage their forest differently? And what do they do with managing their forest, and what do they do with all that wood waste? And most of the time, we're usually getting about 20 to 30 people out at our sites. So we're doing about 6 a year, going through the process. And so far we've had a lot of questions, which is good. Biochar itself that's produced, when we produce this, we're not taking the biochar ourselves. The biochar, we always talk to the landowner. We're doing this on public land. The biochar is for the public landowning entity. We're also using public dollars to process this. So you can't make anything off, you can't make any income back on that biochar. So we leave it for the landowners to use. Sometimes that means that they're like, Todd, I don't know what to do with the biochar. Which means my ultimate turnaround is then we're going to put it back on site. We're just going to spread it out. Kind of like we've heard, you spread it out, you help get soil, moisture retention in the soil, but also we also then talk to the landowner that's fine, we just did a buckthorn removal. Those berries are typically viable in the ground for about 3 years. Do you have enough natural resource staff on hand? Can you monitor this plot if we throw this back out and see if there's any implications on the germination of the buckthorn in the soil, knowing that buckthorn needs high nitrogen soils to germinate, and knowing that biochar can absorb some nitrogen into it as well. And I should throw in here, we also are talking to ag professionals. That always slips my mind. I just think it's we didn't even have that on our radar when we started talking biochar. That came from another side of our organization that's dealing with silvopasture and continuous living cover. And they started having conversations with farmers that didn't know what to do in their silvopasture, which is grazing cattle in forested lands. And they kept saying, we gotta cut all this material, what are we gonna do? And we're like, well, we have this biochar initiative. We didn't think about this, but let's start talking about it. And we have a lot of interest from farmers in Minnesota and now Wisconsin and the border of South Dakota, they're asking us, what can I do with this back 40 that now I want to put cattle back onto, and how can I make it productive? And then there comes the final one, which we're into right now as well, is hiring contractors. So like I said, we're a conservation organization. We're doing conservation across the landscape. Now we got to get the contractors involved. We have the kilns. That was part of it. Let's break down barriers for service providers so that they don't have to do the initial investment. Let's Great River Green, we're going to get the kilns. We're going to have the Oregon kiln. We're going to have the Ring of Fire. We're going to build ourselves a big box kiln, and we're going to get the contractors out there, and we're going to get them to use them and give us feedback, as well as we're going to give them feedback. The Ring of Fire, we haven't had much problems with that. That one, somehow that one they get. The big box, they think the faster they feed it, the more it's going to burn. And then they want to dump it out, and we have unburnt logs inside of it. I think they're not, I don't know what it is. I think they're in the machine and then no one's telling them what's going on. And then also the feedback from them was scale. Not everybody has a backhoe. We just happen to have one contractor that they do a land clearance, so they had a backhoe. And we're now starting to toy around with what the weight is of the big box kiln that we own. We have 2 more on order, and I've been working with a manufacturer or a fabricator to how do we get that weight down so that they can use a skid loader to get it off of our trailer, or get it off of the trailer if they use it from us. The small Bobcat there, they had trouble moving it. They saw it when they got there, and that one, I think, that kiln's about 2,200 pounds, which is on the top end of what that skid loader can actually do. So we're working with our fabricator right now to get it down to about 1,800 pounds, which a lot of our contractors who have skid steers can get it off trailers. And this is our feedback, essentially what we're getting. Our service providers are interested in larger volumes. They don't want to once they go, they want to commit, they want to just push in as much material as possible. And we're also hearing that from farmers. Farmers want something bigger. We thought the Oregon kilns were going to work for farmers. We're finding out that works best for private landowners that have small forest tracts. Farmers are really interested in the Ring of Fires, especially the fact that they can scale them up. They're modular, they can make them whatever size they need, and they can also use their machines. We have farmers that are also interested in the big box because they have a little bit bigger equipment and they can use those. Our contractors are primarily on the Ring of Fires and big box. Contractors are coming back to us contractors are coming also back to us with feedback that, hey Todd, I know you want me to do this and I'm going to put a bid on this, but what's my risk? Our answer back is, how about we hire you for 2 days? And let's see what you get done in 2 days, and then we'll discuss what we're going to do with the rest of the material. They're concerned that they're not going to be able to process the material in the amount of time, or what the amount of time is going to take them to do it. And then also, we're looking at access. So I talked about farmers are interested in this. We just got a grant from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, a wood waste grant, and we're going to try and answer that. We have these kilns now, and we're going to start figuring out how to break down barriers for renting these kilns. Like I said, we're in one part of the state, and I have a farmer out in the western part of the state. How do I get them a kiln so they can use a kiln? We now have transportation paid for to get the kiln to them and come back and pick it up, as well as help them set it up and walk them through what they need to do. And then we're also talking about localized hubs. So we have a soil and water conservation district that can be a partner of ours in northern Minnesota. We can drop off 2 kilns. All the rentals run through us. They just have to be the holders of the kiln for when someone needs to rent it. And then we're still in the state, what does biochar at scale look like? So kind of to date, internally, we're sitting with 7 Oregon kilns, 7 Ring of Fires, and 3 big box that we're trying to get out in the landscape. Internally, our staff is training. We're still collecting data on everything that we're doing. Externally, Natural Systems is just continuing to engage service providers, landowners, fire agencies, and other general public. And then continue to push how we work in regenerative ag and silvopasture and get those kilns to agricultural producers. As far as dissemination goes, we're working on the kiln access. Next is we're going to start sharing our findings. We have until next year. We're going to be working diligently over this next 6 to 9 months, is to take all the information we've collected, get it up on our website so it's discernible to the public. And then we're continuing to do demonstrations. We're trying to figure out how we're going to expand demonstrations and presentations. We're getting requests from the state of Wisconsin from people. Problem is the funding we have currently is locked to Minnesota. It's from Minnesota taxpayers. We've got to stay in Minnesota with it. So how do we get outside of Minnesota, get to Wisconsin? We've had it, like I said, from South Dakota. How do we start to expand the network and just really continue to get the education out there? And then we have a lot of our volunteers. We hold volunteer events all year long for our conservation projects. Our volunteers really like fire. And we got to figure out how to get volunteers involved in it. We had volunteers when we had snow cover and we did burn piles. We'd have volunteers help with burn piles. But our insurance company has raised a little flag with the fact that there's this hot steel box around it, and what if someone trips? So we're still working through how do we get volunteers involved. So far, we've had volunteers help process the wood, and then our staff is feeding it in. That seems to work. I really still think the hands-on approach and getting people taught on what the feeding method is, that's where we're going to gain the benefit on getting volunteers involved. These are just our outcomes since 2023. And when I say facilitated, this is through rental as well as us doing demonstrations. So we've had some farmers borrow our kilns. We've had contractors do it. And so we did 97 cubic yards to date. 70 cubic yards of that is just through demonstrations and through this year. We've talked with 500 plus land managers and service providers. And what's next is just getting on the road and sharing knowledge. We're working, like I said, we got our wood waste grant. That's statewide. That's allowing us to go statewide and do demonstrations, continue to get the kiln rental assistance, and then get the focus with egg producers in the state of Minnesota. There's NRCS, the 336 is not adopted in Minnesota as a standard practice yet. So there's some work with USDA in the state. There's concerns of, does the biochar hold on to herbicide in the soil or not? Legit excuse, we're dealing with a food supply. It is adopted in Wisconsin, and then continue to work with land managers and process char. And does it mean hire our staff to come out and do it, or do we continue to contract out? So any questions, feel free to, that's my contact information up there. Again, Centerpoint Energy Foundation has helped support us be here today. They're helping support the demonstration on Thursday, and then as well as Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.